Okay, so we're going to start getting into deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is sometimes called logical reasoning, and it's the process of reasoning logically from given statements or facts to a conclusion. So, this first part is we're talking about the law of detachment, and it says that if you have an if-then statement and you know the hypothesis is true, then you should also know that the conclusion should be true. Let's see what this looks like. So it asks what we can conclude from the given statements. It gives you an if-then statement. So it says, if a student gets an A on a final exam, then the student will pass the course. Then it will also give you a second statement, and in this case it says, Felicia got an A on her history final exam. If this statement matches what you have in the hypothesis, then I can go ahead and conclude that Felicia would be in this conclusion part. So, Felicia got an A on her history final exam, so that means she matches the hypothesis. So then to conclude, Felicia will pass the course. So my conclusion is just that. Let's try again here. Here's my if-then. If a ray divides an angle into two congruent angles, then the ray is an angle bisector. My statement says, ray RS divides angle ARB so that these two angles are congruent. If it doesn't make sense in terms of notation, draw a picture. So here's my angle ARB, and then ray RS is going to divide it. So if it divides it, then that means this angle and this angle are congruent, which matches this notation. ARS is congruent to SRB. So in my statement, my sentence matches my hypothesis. So since it matches, I can conclude what it has in the conclusion. So since this ray divides this angle, then ray RS is an angle bisector. So that would be my conclusion. Pause the video and try letter C. So here we have, if two angles are adjacent, then they share a common vertex. Angle 1 and angle 2 share a common vertex. Notice that this sentence does not match my hypothesis. So I cannot make a conclusion because the statement does not come up with the same hypothesis. So it has to match what you have in that hypothesis spot. Alright, that was law of detachment. So a sentence matching your hypothesis. Now we're going to work towards law of syllogism. So what this says is, if I have two if-then statements, so such as, if it is July, then you are on the summer vacation. If you are on summer vacation, then you work at a smoothie shop. If my conclusion of the first sentence matches the conclusion of the hypothesis of the second sentence, then I can go ahead and eliminate those two and bridge the gap between the first hypothesis and the second conclusion. So I could conclude, if it is July, then you work at a smoothie shop. Let's take a look at another one. If a figure is a square, then the figure is a rectangle. If a figure is a rectangle, then the figure has four sides. Notice that the conclusion of the first matches the hypothesis of the second. That needs to occur in order for me to use the law of syllogism. So now it's like taking those two pieces out, if you will. So imagine eliminating those with whiteout, and I'm going to stick the other two pieces together. So the hypothesis of the first, if a figure is a square, is going to line up with the conclusion of the second. Then the figure has four sides. Let's try again. If you do gymnastics, then you are flexible. If you do ballet, then you are flexible. Conclusion of the first has to match hypothesis of the second. So these do not match, which is why I cannot put those together. So in this case, I would not be able to make a conclusion. Alright, pause the video and try the last. In the last one, here are my two statements. The conclusion of the first matches the hypothesis of the second. So since they match, I can go ahead and put them together. So you should be writing, if a whole number ends in 0, then it's divisible by 5. Now there are some problems where you can do them together. So for example, if you live in Accra, then you live in Ghana. If you live in Ghana, then you live in Africa. Asa lives in Accra. So what that's saying is you can do both pieces at the same time. So since I have you live in Ghana in the conclusion of the first, it matches the hypothesis of the second. I know that if I live in Accra, then I also live in Africa. Well, law of detachment says if this matches my hypothesis, then I can conclude the last piece. So I know that Asa lives in Africa. So you can sometimes do both of the pieces together. You just have to make sure that it still matches up the same. Alright, law of detachment, law of syllogism. Let me know if you still have questions.